remains determined to work with partners to secure de-escalation measures and to impose a ceasefire. Europeans will necessarily be a key pillar of the just and lasting solution we are collectively building to end Russia's war on Ukraine, he says. Macron and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz are also determined to convince their Belgian colleague Bart de Wever to agree to allow more than 100 billion euros of frozen Russian assets held in Belgium to be used as collateral for a loan to Ukraine. De Wever says other European Union governments haven't yet agreed to his requirements, including agreeing to share the burden of paying back the money to Moscow if that becomes necessary. For NPR News, I'm Terry Schultz in Brussels.
Hamas says it is willing to lay down its weapons in a ceasefire with Israel. A senior Hamas official made those comments in an interview with NPR, as NPR's Daniel Estrin reports from Doha, Qatar.
Bassem Naim is a member of Hamas's political leadership who survived Israeli airstrikes on Hamas leaders in Qatar in September. He tells NPR that Hamas in Gaza is willing to store its weapons with guarantees that they would not use them against Israel as long as there are political negotiations to create a Palestinian state.
We are ready to lay down these weapons. Not to use it for 5, 7, 10 years, as long as we are not attacked.
Previously, Hamas had not been willing to discuss laying down its weapons. It's unclear if Israel and Hamas can reach an agreement on what will happen with the weapons. Israel demands Gaza be demilitarized. Daniel Estrin, NPR News, Doha, Qatar.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he continues to oppose the creation of a Palestinian state. He says he'll talk further with President Trump this month about peace opportunities in Gaza. The enhanced healthcare subsidies that Congress funded during the pandemic are going to run out at the end of the month unless lawmakers act. The Senate is supposed to vote Thursday on a Democratic plan extending these subsidies for 3 years. Senate Republican leaders don't support that extension. NPR's Deirdre Walsh reports there appears to be similar action in the House.
Well, House Speaker Mike Johnson is planning to release a health care bill this week. He's promising a vote this month, but we don't have any details on what's going to be in it, and he's not negotiating with any Democrats. But there are other House Republicans from swing districts who are teaming up with Democrats to push bills. They call for 1 or 2 year extensions of these subsidies with some reforms.
NPR's Deirdre Walsh reporting. On Wall Street and pre-market trading, Dow futures are higher. This is NPR.
Good morning. You're listening to WJCT News, 89.9 in Jacksonville. I'm Stephen Ponson. It is now 9:04. The 81st TaxSlayer Gator Bowl matchup is set. The Virginia Cavaliers will take on the Missouri Tigers in this year's game at Everbank Stadium. Virginia's 10-3 on the season, coming into the game after losing to Duke in the Atlantic Coast Conference Championship game over the weekend, while Missouri is 8-4 on the year. The game will be played on Saturday, December 27th at 7:30 p.m., and it'll be broadcast nationally on ABC. New life could be coming soon to the historic Laura Street trio of buildings in downtown Jacksonville. The Jacksonville Daily Record reports Indiana-based Bukovic Management Group plans to close on the purchase of the 3 buildings at the corner of Laura and Forsyth Streets next week and the refurbished Barnett Building tomorrow. The group says plans for the trio include multifamily units, a hotel, commercial and retail space, a restaurant, and there could be new construction for the property. The trio of buildings in downtown have sat vacant for decades amid several failed attempts to redevelop them. The buildings were some of the first to be built after the Great Fire of 1901, which destroyed much of the city. We've got a foggy start to the day here in northeast Florida and southeast Georgia. Then later on, a chance for some inland showers, but all the rainfall should be gone by the early afternoon. Drier air will then move in after that. We'll have mostly cloudy skies today with highs reaching the low to mid-60s for northeast Florida. Overnight temperatures will drop down into the 30s and 40s, so it'll be a cold start to the day tomorrow. Dry weather conditions will continue through the middle of the week with mostly clear skies.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Fisher Investments. As a fiduciary, Fisher Investments is obligated to act in their client's best interest. Learn more at FisherInvestments.com. Investing in securities involves the risk of loss. This is NPR.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, 65% of Northeast Florida river tributaries remain unsafe for swimming and fishing. We asked two experts why progress in the local St. Johns River Basin has been so challenging and what, if any, signs they see of improvement. Later in the program, how a failure to save an iconic riverside castle helped catalyze a historic preservation movement in Jacksonville. But first, the 18th annual State of the River report was released last Tuesday, and it reveals a range of concerns from persistent sewage pollution to rising rates of salinity, algae blooms, and some pharmaceuticals. Here to talk about the ongoing challenges to keep the lower St. Johns River Basin clean is Lisa Rinaman, the St. Johns Riverkeeper. Lisa, good morning. Welcome.
Good morning, Ann.
In just a few minutes, we're going to be joined by Dr. Gerry Pinto. He's an associate research scientist at Jacksonville University, one of the report's authors, and he is just running a few minutes late, so he's going to join us in progress. Lisa, I saw one description in this, in a summary of this river report that called it a complex picture of health, which I thought was an interesting phrasing and perhaps, the most positive light to say. But I mean, granting that the picture is complex, are there elements of this river system that you describe as healthy?
Oh, that's a challenging question. The river itself is complex. When you have a river with an 8,800 square mile watershed, there are lots of threats. There's lots of different nuances to the river's health. And so it is very hard to point to one thing that's doing really well. But the good thing is you do have people paying attention to it. And that's one of the values of this river report is really understanding how all these complexities work with one another. We are seeing some improvement in some areas with nutrient pollution, but then we see other areas where it's increasing. And when a significant amount of nutrient pollution comes from outside the lower basin, it underscores the importance of looking at this data and figuring out, most importantly, how do we do something with it to make sure that we are protecting this river for future generations.
You talk about the size of the watershed. So for people who aren't familiar with just the definition of the lower St. Johns River Basin, remind us where we're talking about.
Yeah, so the lower St. Johns River is the last 100 miles of the St. Johns. Since the river flows north, it begins its 310-mile journey in Indian River County, and it flows north, and right where the Ocklawaha River meets the St. Johns, just south of Willaca, that's the beginning of the lower St. Johns River watershed. And so it's that last 100 miles of the St. Johns from Willaca all the way up to Mayport where it meets the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah, and so you're talking about sort of in the counties, Volusia, Putnam area, and then north.
Absolutely. So you have Putnam County, you have Volusia County, Putnam County, St. Johns, Clay, Duval, as well as parts of Nassau County.
Yeah.
And so all that flows into it. And it's about the watershed. You can't look at the health of the St. Johns River without really looking at the health of all the tributaries and everything that feed into the St. Johns, because that's part of this river system.
And that's a big part of the findings of this report, because the main stem of the river, which is what we think of the river covered by the bridges,
right?
That is doing somewhat better. And the increasing problem of all of the various metrics, and we'll get into those, really does seem to be in the tributaries. And that's, obviously a huge part of this watershed.
Absolutely. It is. It's more, I think it's more dire in the tributaries, but we also see some slippery issues with the main stem itself, with increasing nutrient pollution coming from upstream, as well as the increase in salinity and the wide variety of fresh saltwater spikes in the St. Johns.
We are now joined by Dr. Gerry Pinto. I'm glad to have you here. Thank you so much for coming in this morning, sir.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to ask you a little bit about just the big picture of this report, because we said at the top, this is the 18th year of this report. You have been working on water issues far longer than that in this area. Decades now. And so if you just had to summarize kind of the trajectory that you've seen in that time, how do you think we're doing?
That's a question I get a lot. And it's not easy to answer because we have this thing called shifting baselines. So throughout this continuum of time, things have been changing in the river. Things have been changing population-wise, technology-wise, a lot of different ways, development-wise. The pressures on the natural resources have increased considerably. So all those kinds of things put pressure on the river. And so if you were to ask, how was the river 50 years ago, we had raw sewage flowing into the river. Now we don't, so that's a good thing. But we've had a massive increase in population, human population. We all contribute nutrient streams, believe it or not, to our wastewater treatment plants. And so those things add to the system as nutrients in some form or another, after they've been cleaned or not. And so, we're doing okay in some areas, but we have to be very careful going forward. We don't want something happening in the river that happened in the Indian River Lagoon recently, where we saw the ecosystem pretty much collapse because of nutrient pollution. So we have to be wary of that going forward. And this is a problem that many cities, many urban areas, many places around the world are suffering with.
So I think I hear you saying that there have been improvements in terms of the way that we treat the river, the way that we treat things that go into the river. But overall, the health of the river continues to be impaired because of the additional stresses. Has it gotten overall worse?
In some cases it has. We're seeing more algae blooms. That's an indicator that there's a lot more nutrients going into the system that are feeding these algae blooms. We have, you talked about pharmaceuticals that are appearing in the water. Normally, a good wastewater treatment system plant will remove those things. So you have to ask yourself, how are they getting in the water? Obviously, they're human sources, and they must be coming from leaking somewhere. And so we have this huge septic tank problem in our municipality. 60,000 septic tanks, 40,000 of which have been deemed necessary to be removed. And we have some projects ongoing on the north side to remove some. But we're really at the beginning stages of removing those or connecting those up to the sewage system. And so that's a major concern right there.
In terms of pharmaceuticals, you say a good water treatment system should remove those. Do we know if our water treatment systems here are removing those?
They should be. I mean, the amount of, the level of water treatment that our Buckman plant and other plants do, they should be able to remove those.
Okay, and so you're thinking is
so
that
I'm thinking leaking septic tanks, maybe failure of pipes, old infrastructure, breaking down. These are sources where leaks can occur. We've had sanitary sewer overflows this past year that are lower than in past years, but those spills can be from 1 gallon to 100,000 gallons. Actually, we had a 100,000 gallon spill last year, and so those are big problems.
And I think we have an image that shows the number and the intensity of sanitary sewage overflows in the system for the last several years that people who are watching our live stream can see. But that does continue to be a problem. In addition to the leaking septics. If you're just joining us, we are talking to Jacksonville University marine science researcher Dr. Gerry Pinto and Riverkeeper Lisa Rinaman about the findings of the newly released St. John's the State of the River report. You can join the conversation on air by calling 904-549-2937, or you can go to firstcoastconnect.org to find all the ways you can connect with us. We've got a call from Mark in St. Augustine. Good morning, Mark. Go ahead.
Hey, I've been pessimistic about the river for decades now. There's nothing we can do when we've got 10,000 people moving into Jacksonville every day or every week or some crazy number like that. We continue to let developers build new housing subdivisions with septic systems. I mean, we're taking a few, hundreds or maybe 1,000 old leaky septic systems offline, but we're replacing them with 5,000 more. Also, I would like to know and let's not forget that Orlando is sucking, 10 million gallons of St. John's River water every day to water their golf courses. Everybody seems to have forgotten that. But I want to know, my question is, I hear some talk that they are finally going to decommission the Rodman Reservoir. Will that do anything to improve the condition of the St. John's River?
Many good questions there, Mark. Lisa Rinaman, obviously, well, let's start with the Rodman, because that is an issue you've worked on for many, many years to try to remove the Kirkpatrick Dam from the Rodman Reservoir and restore the Ocklawaha River as it flows into the St. Johns.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something been decades in the making, to breach the dam to allow a free-flowing Ocklawaha River to reunite Silver Springs, the Ocklawaha, and the St. Johns. That decision is still being made in Tallahassee. Most likely there'll be legislation, this legislative session that begins in January.
It passed last year, right?
It was put in the appropriations bill, and so it did not. It was vetoed by the governor, and so this year it seems like the energy around is going to legislation. So there'll be active committee meetings, opportunities for Mark and others to weigh in to make sure that this happens, because it is very important to the health of the lower St. Johns River. It's not a silver bullet. It's not going to undo all the harms that we need to work together to make sure we're working on a restore. But it will replenish the St. Johns River with 150 million gallons of fresh water every day. Some of that will come from restored springs as well as loss of evaporation. So that'll help offset some of the saltwater intrusion issues I'm sure we'll talk about in a moment. Also, it has 7,000 plus acres of forested floodplain that will be restored. Those type of wetlands are the best biofilters, so that'll help filter out pollution, and it really helps restore submerged grasses downstream, which are the kidneys of the St. Johns, not to mention all the impacts to our fisheries by allowing more migratory pathways to open up. And so it's multifaceted, the impacts, and you can find out more information at reunitethерivers.com.
Yeah. Dr. Pinto, we talked about, I want to talk more about nutrient pollution in a minute and really explain what that is and where it's coming from, the primary sources. But there are other challenges to the river, including, inputs of pollution, specific contaminants. Can you talk a little bit about what kinds of contaminants? We mentioned pharmaceuticals. That's one kind. What are some of the other ones that this report looks at?
So I'll start off by saying that that's not really my area of expertise. We have Dr. Gretchen Billmeyer, who's the environmental toxicologist who handles that section of the report. But we have contaminants that are things like metals, heavy metals, cadmium, mercury, lead, nickel, zinc, aluminum, and these tend not to be much of a problem in the main stem of the river, more so in the tributaries. One of the biggest problems, though, with the metal information is that we have very limited data, particularly in the tributaries on metals. If you look at, for example, I think it's nickel, there were 300 and something readings of nickel taken in the past, but only in the last 5 years that's down to maybe 30 to 40. So almost a tenfold change has occurred in actual monitoring of these sorts of things. So metals is one thing. Metals in the sediments, metals in the water column. We also look at organochlorine pesticides and total pesticides in the water column. And those have increased over the years quite a lot.
Yeah.
Particularly, we also look at things like PCBs, and these are long-lived chemicals that are, as individuals, there's a whole stream of them. If you add them all up, the cumulative effect is much higher than the thresholds, water quality criteria. And those are things that do not degrade. I mean, they're in the sediments, and when you do things like dredging, or you have storms that whip up the system, stir things up, those things get resuspended, and of course they're a problem. And these metals and these pesticides and things tend to bioaccumulate up the food chain as well. So they're affecting the organisms in the river. They're affecting what eats those, and then eventually humans at some point are consuming some of the fish in there that may have accumulated some of these things.
We have a call from Juanita on the south side. Good morning, Juanita. Go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for your services, Lisa and Dr. Pinto. I wanted to find out, I did listen to the State of the River report, and I wanted to find out more information on the finding that there were E. coli that was present in the Julington and Durban Creeks area. However, there were only small samples taken, so there wasn't any conclusory determination there. Why was there not more sampling done in those areas if E. coli was in fact found there?
That's a very good question. Juanita, do you have an answer for that, Dr. Pinto?
Yeah, this is not uncommon to other tributaries as well. We have a huge area that the agencies are trying to cover, DEP measuring these things, bacteria levels. And so what we've tended to do over the years is sort of spot check. So that's a very limited number of samples in many different areas to cover this massive, massive watershed. And when something is discovered, usually there's more emphasis and focus in that area and more samples are taken there. So if you look at the data over time, there are some tributaries that have good data or more data, and then there are other tributaries that don't have very much at all. And so in an analysis of that, this year, Dr. Scott Jones from UNF has looks at that section in terms of water quality and nutrients, and has kind of done an analysis where we look at the wet season and the dry season and how that affects those things. But generally speaking, when a problem is discovered, then more emphasis is directed there. The problem is that we have so many tributaries, and we have sort of a very spot-checking way of doing that we don't have accurate data or the same amount of data in all these areas.
And for folks who are watching our live stream, we have a graphic that was part of this report that shows 23 major waterways that are considered impaired, basically not attaining standards under existing law, meaning they're not safe for swimming, fishing, or wildlife. And that includes so many tributaries, but really ones, Lisa, that are iconic. Julington Creek is on that, Ribault River, the Broward River, the Trout River, Cedar River. So when we think of tributaries, these aren't little tiny creeks. These are major waterways that people are recreating on. They're playing in, they're fishing in, often despite warnings to not fish in these areas. I mean, there's a picture that appeared in the Times-Union not long ago of someone sitting on the bank with a fishing pole in the water right next to a sign that warned of the hazards.
Yeah, and there's even a lack of signage. One of the challenges here, as Dr. Pinto mentioned, we don't have enough data, and so we really need more information. And there's also lack of signage on some of the tributaries that are polluted and telling people not to fish and swim because the health agencies say, well, there's not enough data. So we're sort of in this spiral of not having enough information to really identify the sources, to do something about it, to clean up these creeks, and to warn the public to make sure that they're remaining healthy. We're in ongoing conversations working with the health department to try to make sure that we're letting people know. But also, we as an organization, St. John's Riverkeeper, we've started collecting more data in Ribault River and Moncrief Creeks, really honing in on an area to see what can we do to make sure we're not spreading the information too thin, and honing in to figure out what's really happening and where is it coming from, and hoping to use that project as a pilot to do more of it. Because I think one of the things the River Report tells us every year is we simply don't have enough information, and we're seeing cuts every day at our agencies where we get less information. And until we have data to really make sure we're making the right decisions for investment, we're going to be spinning our wheels and seeing increases in pollution across the board.
We've got a call from Denise in Mayport. Good morning, Denise. Go ahead.
Hi, Lisa, I just tuned in, so you may have addressed this, but I thought you participated in a study aboard the MRZ with some students analyzing plant life along the river. And if I'm correct, did that study indicate how plant life may have been affected by pollution?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you for that question, Denise, and I haven't covered it. One of the things that St. John's Riverkeeper launched in 2023 was a Save Our Rivers Grasses expedition. Because one of the things we see in the River Report every year, we're losing our submerged aquatic vegetation. It's really the canary in the coal mine. These submerged grasses, they're the kidneys of the St. Johns River, as well as their critical fish habitat. So our commercial and recreational fisheries depend on them. And we've seen a significant loss since Hurricane Irma. And the bigger problem is they're not coming back. And so we launched a 5-year program. We just finished up year 3 to study what's going on with our grasses over an 80-mile section of the lower St. Johns River, and also what can we do about it? How can we work towards solutions, meeting with agencies, elected officials, fishermen, and using that data to really make sure we're looking at real solutions. And the 2025 report will be out later this year. And then we'll be hosting a series of meetings up and down the lower St. Johns to discuss these, so the health and the state of the submerged grasses, and most importantly, what can we do about it?
We had a question, Dr. Pinto, that raised the issue of, why aren't we doing more testing? And I guess when it comes to the issue of Julington Creek and the presence of E. coli, I guess one of my thoughts is it's so prevalent, it may not even really send up a flag for people who are doing the testing, because is there really a tributary in St. John's in the lower basin that doesn't have E. coli concern levels? And I just want to ask as a second part, kind of, what is the situation when it comes to funding for testing of water quality?
Well, I don't really know what the situation for funding is, but it's never been sufficient to cover what needs to be done, and I don't think it ever will be. But it will. But we can focus in areas where we're identifying hotspots, and so yes, all our tributaries, pretty much all 60-something of them that have been looked at, have exceedances of the water quality criteria. There are a few that are mentioned in the river report. Just offhand, I can't remember all of them, but places like Miller Creek, a couple of sub-tributaries in the Arlington River. Just to mention a few, Cowpen Creek, there are a few of them that are over 100% exceeding the water quality criteria, and they haven't changed in a while. They're still very high. So those are sort of problem areas that we can identify. Now we have to find out, what are the sources and how to address those sources. But they have been a problem for a while. But generally speaking, the septic tank removal process, or the hooking up to the sewer system, is sort of just at the beginning stages. This is a massive effort that will take billions of dollars, eventually to complete. But you mentioned earlier, one of the big problems is we keep permitting septic tanks, and I admit that in some places there is no sewer, and you have to have some kind of on-site treatment like that. But the latest technology and better inspection and keeping up with those things and fixing them when they leak or when there's a problem with them is going to be critical.
We know, Lisa, that the septic situation is a problem, and it is all over the state. And so moving to sewage treatment and a more kind of, organized system of disposing of sewage is the solution. And yet we know, and Riverkeeper has been very active in trying to hold to account the issue of sanitary sewer overflows. We see those a lot during storms. Again, that's something that this report tracks, but those can have enormous volume impacts on the watershed and really impair water quality in the short and long term. So how do you view this transition from septic to sewer in terms of the presence of things like E. coli or pharmaceuticals or other things that are rooted in human waste?
Yeah, it's really problematic because, quite honestly, we have a significant problem with our overall sewage plan for the state of Florida. When you have a state that's growing as quickly as the state of Florida in our watershed, you really need to have a sustainable long-term plan to manage that growing volume of human waste. And right now, state policy is actually encouraging, incentivizing, and permitting South Florida to send their biosolids, the byproduct for treating sewage at wastewater treatments, to the headwaters of the St. Johns. So at the same time, we're trying to get money to take septic tanks offline, send them to a wastewater treatment facility. If we're just taking the sludge, the byproduct that's only partially treated, and disposing it on land in our watershed, we're just playing whack-a-mole with this sewage, and we're basically undermining the river's health as well as undermining that public investment that Dr. Pinto mentioned that needs to happen to get these septic tanks offline. So we're just again playing whack-a-mole if we don't make sure that when we send sewage to the wastewater treatment facilities, they have advanced treatment to make sure it's taking out all of the pharmaceuticals and nutrients that need to be, and that we're not just simply disposing of reclaimed water that may be adding more pollution to the problem if not treated properly, and then biosolids on land. It's just in a downward spiral that we have to correct. And that's going to take legislative action, and it's going to take local governments coming together to make sure we're protecting our public investment and our long-term health of the river and its tributaries.
And we've talked a little bit about the disposal of these biosolids, this wastewater treatment sludge, essentially, before. And, we most recently over the summer talked about this report that came out from a group called the Balmoral Group that found that cleaning up pollution from sewage sludge could cost over $1.2 billion in the next 4 decades and that's kind of consistent with what has been shown to be the impacts of this South Florida ban on disposing of sewage sludge. So essentially all of their sewage sludge is being trucked to areas in Central and North Florida,
That's right.
including around the headwaters of the St. Johns River, which, as we know, flows north. And so those pollution elements just come north.
Absolutely. And so, you have elected officials in Indian River County, Brevard County, and Osceola County all coming together to try to stop this practice because this is happening in their counties and they haven't really had a say on what happens. And then all of this is coming downstream. About 80% of the nitrogen reduction that needs to happen in the lower St. Johns is from upstream sources, as well as about more than half of the phosphorus. And so even though we've made some progress in the lower basin, there's more pollution coming if we don't try and change the state policy. Luckily, there is legislation, but it's not perfect yet. So there will be an active biosolids discussion in Tallahassee in January and February.
And the legacy of these biosolid, the impact, Dr. Pinto, those are things that even if we were to stop dumping biosolids, around the headwaters of the St. Johns River today, there would be ongoing impacts that even might intensify just because of the legacy of that dumping. Or I shouldn't say dumping. I mean, it is a land application. It's used as a fertilizer in agricultural settings, right?
Well, yes, that's true. And the soils that those are applied to will of course become logged, fully not waterlogged, but they will become very saturated with that material. A lot of phosphorus is in it too. A lot of heavy metals, PFAS, all these kinds of things, because those types of biosolids are not really clean to what we call the AA standard, which is turned into a commercial fertilizer, and you're able to use it as fertilizer. But the other ones are not clean to that level. And so all those things will eventually leach into waterways. Particularly talking about nutrients, almost soon after this practice started, water management districts started noticing increasing phosphorus levels in the water. And those are only going to continue to increase over time. We have rising water levels, rising water tables. The way that those biosolids are applied, there is a strict protocol, but we don't know how well it's being enforced. And problems with that can exacerbate this situation for sure.
There are a few positives in this report, and I feel like it would be unfair to not talk about some of those. There have been a few species that are doing better in the watershed, including the return of the short-nosed sturgeon. Wood storks are doing better. Bald eagles are doing better. How much can we take from those few positives in terms of the overall future and the state of the river?
Yeah, well, there is some bright news. I mean, I will say the data on sturgeon is very limited, but we have better data on wood storks and bald eagles and manatees that were once endangered are now threatened, and some have been delisted, like the bald eagle. But if you track those populations, the long-term trends are good for them. They're up still. Although if you look more recently, since the Hurricane Irma anyway, bald eagles and wood storks took a big hit because their habitat was affected, but if you look at them in the last couple of years, they're starting to go back up again. And so that's a good sign. But the general long-term trends are up, so that's a good sign.
If there was one thing that either of you could just today, make a single change to an input or a cause of harm to the St. Johns River, what would you prioritize first?
Well, we talked about the dire straits of our grass beds, the submerged aquatic vegetation in the river. That's really important habitat. I mean, it only represents a small amount of the actual total area, but it's very critical for a lot of wildlife. Manatees use it, birds, fish use it as habitat. Our blue crab fishery is the biggest in the river. They use those grass beds at certain times. So that it's critical to try to understand why those are disappearing in certain parts. We've found out that, as I said before, that it's a dynamic system. So in the north, it's very much salinity stressed, and that's why the grasses don't grow well there. That's been occurring over time because of dredging and saltwater pushing further into the river, also because of sea levels rising. In the southern part of our basin, you have increased color in the water, so that diminishes the amount of light that the plants get. But also you have increased water levels now too, so that also decreases the amount of light that the plants get. Some of those plants are getting less than 40% of the light that they used to get. And so when they're small and they're trying to recover, it's very much harder. And so I will say that, we've lost grasses in certain parts, particularly in the north. It's coming back in certain patches. But the general picture is pretty dire right now, and we need to find a way to rejuvenate that habitat, which brings me back to the Ocklawaha, which is the biggest tributary to the St. Johns River, provides or historically provided 40% of the freshwater input into the river, and how restoring that flow to its natural flow would enhance the system, would provide more of the kidneys of the environment to clean the wetlands. You talked about 7,000 acres of wetlands. Freshwater inputs are very important into an estuary. And so I think that would be, the key thing, I think I would say, would be getting that
Restore
input
the river.
restored.
Yeah.
And I would echo that. Definitely reuniting Silver Springs, the Ocklawaha, and the St. Johns would have a significant boost to the long-term health of the St. Johns River and its fisheries. But I'd also say we have to have a sustainable plan for ongoing management sustainable management of our growing volume of human waste. We cannot continue to play whack-a-mole with our growing amount of sewage. And I think that that's something we need to all come together to have a cleaner St. Johns and tributaries.
Well, we know that this report is going to be presented in more detail on February 13th at the Environmental Symposium. I trust that you both will be there. But it's great to speak to you this morning, Dr. Gerry Pinto, Lisa Rinaman, the Riverkeeper. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Up next, snakes, spies, and efforts to save an iconic Five Points Castle. We talked to local author Tim Gilmore about his latest book. Welcome back. Well, it's not a success story, but it is an object lesson in the power of failure to animate a movement. Here to tell us about his latest book, When We Tried to Save the Castle, is author, educator, and Jack's Psycho-Geo blogger, Tim Gilmore. Good morning, Tim.
Hey, and thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. And wow, so this is book 25.
It is.
You make the rest of the world feel just straight up lazy.
Oh, I'm just obsessive.
You are obsessive, and to our benefit. So
thank you.
This book is, even out of all the books you've done, you say is something special. It is a book that focuses on a particular building, but as all of your stories do, tells a much broader, deeper, and wider story. So first of all, what is Lomax Castle?
Yeah. Lomax Castle was a big house on Lomax Street at the riverfront that was demolished 50 years ago. It was 3 stories, had a tower on one end and a widow's walk on the top. And so, you might wonder, why would somebody write a book about a house that was demolished 50 years ago? It's really symbolic in a lot of different ways of how different lives move through a house, how a house can represent a city and neighborhood, a history, and as you said, it helped spark the historic preservation movement in Jacksonville.
And
It's
so,
really an incredible story.
and so this is a house that is in Riverside,
Yes.
and it was one of many, many homes on
Mhm.
something kind of known as the Row in Riverside, a very,
Right.
um, you know, wealthy homes,
Mhm.
big homes,
Mhm.
very architecturally diverse
Mhm.
homes.
Mhm. Yeah, lots of cities had something, variously called a millionaire's row or something like that. In Jacksonville, it was called the Row, and it was more than 50 of these enormous houses that lined Riverside Avenue. This house was built in the 1890s in the Queen Anne style, which meant that it was asymmetrical, and Queen Anne's were really showy kinds of houses. It had that tower that nobody could forget if they saw it, and really, became symbolic of a number of different time periods, symbolic of the time when it was built in the 1890s and the wealth that was establishing itself and showing itself off in the city. But as times changed, it also became really symbolic of the late 1960s and the early 1970s, when hippies were renting out this 3-story house for about $100 a month, and two of them started Edge City, the boutique. It started as a head shop, still there in Five Points, and there's just all kinds of incredible stories, wild stories about life in the castle in that time period. So really symbolic in very different kinds of eras.
Yeah, and so the era where that was occupied by the hippies,
Mhm.
there were other homes in that area, these magnificent homes. It's hard to kind
Yeah.
of believe, but,
Right.
this area went into decline.
Yeah.
A lot of homes were demolished, and then the homes that remained were very often a little bit like run by slumlords,
Yeah,
as was the castle.
that's right. Yeah, I often find it. I'm fascinated by cities and how cities grow and change. I teach at FSCJ, and I've often been surprised at how little most of us understand why our cities are shaped the way they are. And so much of, Jacksonville is similar to what happened in cities all across the country after World War II. There was white flight, there was redlining, there was the creation of the interstate system and new, often deed restricted areas outside of the former city limits, and people fled neighborhoods like Springfield and Riverside, and so that time period saw lots of incredible houses demolished or converted into lawyers and doctors' offices, demolished for parking lots, demolished for condo towers, which is the case with the Lomax Castle. And so there was, as a matter of fact, there was a physician who lived in another castle around houses called castles around the corner from Lomax. That house is still there, the Leon Cheek House, which was built by Leon Cheek of Cheek Neal Coffee, which later became Maxwell House. And this physician, his name was Emmett Ferguson. And he bought old properties all over Riverside, and if he could rent them out and make money that way, he certainly did. But if it looked more profitable to tear them down, have them torn down, and let developers do something else there, he certainly was going to do that too. He made lots of enemies for that reason. I found some interesting old quotes both about him and from him. One of them, he said, "All I do is make people mad,"
Right.
because of the kinds of changes that.
Not just because he was a proctologist by profession.
Yeah, I wasn't going to mention that, but that's true. But yeah, so he owned the Lomax Castle, and people who could live in houses like this in the 1960s and 70s, a lot of times would never have been able to live in houses like this before. And this was the case elsewhere on Riverside Avenue with the greenhouse and the gray house where, Leonard Skinner members lived, and the Allman Brothers Band got their start.
Some rock and roll history is rooted in that same period.
That's right.
And so you talk about the various lives that moved through there. Herpetologist from the zoo that lived there. So there was all these snake stories. There was stories of hauntings. But in terms of the fate of the castle itself, it was bought. It was going to be moved and saved, and it wasn't saved.
Yeah, this is so, I knew about the house, but what really caught my eye and started this whole, I always think of the stories that I got myself into as rabbit holes. And what started this one is that I saw a Jacksonville Journal story from 1974. I was looking for something else, and I saw this where someone was taking the house apart a piece at a time. And he planned to move it all to Middleburg, just he and his wife, his poor wife, and rebuild the house in Middleburg. And I thought, what in the world? This is the kind of thing, like if you succeeded at doing that, people would call it heroic and say you were a mad genius or something. And if perhaps inevitably it did not succeed, then
no surprise.
Yeah, but this was 1974. The house was already condemned to be demolished at that point, and Riverside Avondale Preservation had started earlier in the year. And some of the earliest rap newsletters were saying, help save the castle, and calling for neighborhood residents to come together.
And the movement was in many ways animated further by the fact that they weren't able to save the castle.
That's true. Yeah, it's really interesting to me. Also, I like the way you pitched it at the start about failures that prompt progress somehow. They were not able to save it, and some of the early pamphlets said, things like a neighborhood can be beautiful, and had a picture of the castle, when it's all together, and then another picture of it when it's 2/3 demolished, and then underneath it says, unless no one cares. And so of course, RAP started that year, but Springfield Preservation and Restoration started, a little bit later that decade, and other organizations around the city. And of course, this is something that was happening in cities all over the country in response to what had happened to these historic neighborhoods.
The book is called When We Tried to Save the Castle. It has a foreword by Wayne Wood, who is a renowned historian and architectural historian in his own right, because he was very instrumental in that formation of Riverside Avondale. Right. And there is a book launch on Thursday, December 11th at 6 p.m. I believe there is just a little bit of room left, so people do need to RSVP.
Yes, so it's at Happy Medium Books and Cafe, and I think as of this morning it was full, but Dana is going to bump up the cap a little bit. So I talked to her about that, and Happy Medium is this wonderful bookstore and cafe in the middle of Riverside that is really supportive of the literary community here in Jacksonville.
A great place to have the official book launch.
Yeah, I'm
Tim Gilmore, congratulations. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Ann.
All right. Up next, the Jags triumph over the Colts and the team's chances at making the playoffs.
Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. When people are hurt through no fault of their own, finding the who, what, when, where, why, and how that led to the accident is critical to proving the truth.
More at TerrellHoganLaw.com. Mayo Clinic, working to solve the unsolvable by using innovations like machine perfusion to help more patients receive life-saving liver, heart, kidney, and lung transplants. More at mayoclinic.org/Florida.
Hi, it's Terry Gross. There's never been anything on the radio like public radio, with its coverage of news, pop culture, religion, health, science, and more. Public radio contributes so much to American life, but the loss of federal funding puts the future of public radio at risk. You can do something about it by donating to this station today so that we can continue being here for you. Thank you.
Visit wjct.org/donate.
The American Educational Research Association has a big annual conference. And what are they researching? Well, a recent analysis found that the vast majority of presentations were about things like resistance, safe spaces, and identity. But teachers want research on discipline, parental involvement, and mental health. How the gap between what researchers want to study and what teachers actually need is hurting education overall. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
The military's Code of Justice says troops can refuse to comply with illegal orders. As Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth faces backlash for another controversial boat strike, some Democratic lawmakers are calling for service members to stand up and say no. The legality of the Trump administration's military orders and the pressures on troops. Next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, the Jags looked dominant during yesterday's much-needed win against the Indianapolis Colts. Here to help us untangle what all happened is sportscaster Alessandra Pombrian. She joins us from our news partners at News4Jax. Good morning, Alessandra.
Good morning. This is our fourth victory Monday in a row.
I got to ask, have you dried out yet?
Barely. Yesterday was crazy. That weather was awful, but thankfully I was in the press box for the game, so I didn't get rained on, but it looked bad.
Well, the fans were not so lucky because it was a wet game, but a really fun one to be at, I'm sure.
Listen, if you're going to deal with those, like with the elements, at least they won. Yeah. Like that's the good thing. At least they won. And fans really stayed. A lot of them trickled out when it started downpouring, but a lot of fans were still there at the end of the game. So kudos to you guys because I don't know if I would have done that personally. But yeah, the Jaguars won 36-19.
Decisively.
Yeah, very decisively. It's the 11th consecutive win against the Colts here in Jacksonville. So that dates back to 2014, which is just insane. I mean, they've had some awful seasons, and they still managed to beat the Colts here in Jacksonville.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's pretty remarkable, to be honest. They have a 9-4 record, 3-1 in the division, which is huge. That's because now they are the sole leader of the AFC South. They're the number 3 overall seed in the AFC when you look at the playoffs. They're 2 games back from number 1 Patriots and number 2 Broncos, which, and by the way, the Jaguars are going to the Broncos in 2 weeks. They return home on Sunday and host the Jets, which will be a win. They're awful. But this was a huge game. And Liam Cohen said after the game, quote, "I think our guys took control of the moment in terms of understanding that this was a big game in a lot of ways. And I think our guys have responded in so many ways in these big games."
There was some chest bumping between Liam Cohen and Trevor Lawrence in a celebration, kind of enthusiastic. Do you get a sense that their relationship is warming up? I mean, how are they relating now as the team gets better and the season progresses?
I mean, I think you said it perfectly. You can see that there's a lot of excitement, enthusiasm, motivation, in the franchise and in the Miller Electric Center. I think winning obviously helps that. When you're winning, everyone's happy, everyone's motivated, they want to continue winning. And so that helps with those relationship building. And they've only known each other for less than a year. Remember, Liam Cohen didn't come in until February, I believe it was. Yeah, it was February. So they haven't even known each other for a full year, but you can see that chemistry that they have. And earlier in this season, Liam Cohen said they kind of feed off of each other. Trevor's, as you can see, he's very stoic. He's just, even keeled. And Liam may be a little more emotional. And so he did say, they kind of balance each other out. And sometimes Trevor gets kind of some of that emotion in the game. And then Liam's like, okay, well, I have to stay calm now, stuff like that. Yeah. So I think it's great. I think the relationship is great. And it's also offensive coordinator Grant Udinski, who was brought in to help Trevor and improve him. Got to give some credit to him too. The 3 of them obviously are working well, and Trevor Lawrence was absolutely phenomenal yesterday, which is not many times we get to say that. He had 2 passing touchdowns. He was 17-30 for 244 yards in a horrible game. I mean, it was raining, it was gross, it was kind of chilly too, and he played absolutely fantastic. And there were a lot of praises for him after the game from his teammates and from Liam Cohen, and they should, because he had an outstanding game.
Who else stood out to you, and are there areas that you want to see them work on in the next couple of games?
Yeah, I mean, yesterday's game was so good that, I mean, it was a complete team win from literally the moment that the game started. I mean, Devin Lloyd intercepted Daniel Jones on the first throw of the game that led to Travis Etienne with a 3-yard touchdown. So literally from the moment the game started, it was just so dominant, such a complete win. And you need to be able to stack these wins on each other. Now, Daniel Jones, their starting quarterback, who's done really good this season, he left early with an Achilles injury to his right leg. Now, he entered the game with a fractured left leg.
Yikes.
Yeah, which is like remarkable that this guy could even play a football game with a fracture. That it makes no sense to me. But you know what? They obviously took him right to the locker room, and he'll probably be done, maybe even for the season. I mean,
so that played
you
a
have
role
no
too,
good,
right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you have Riley Leonard come in, who's inexperienced. He's a young quarterback, and now he has to take control of this game. And you know, everyone knows what the emotions were going into this game. It was a huge game, and so you were able to obviously roughhouse Riley Leonard a little bit. And you know, there were 3 takeaways in this game. Greg Newsome intercepted the ball in the fourth quarter. Jorian Jones recovered a Jonathan Taylor fumble in this first half, which led to a Travis Etienne 28-yard rushing touchdown. So, and Travis Etienne, you got to give it to him. I mean, those running backs, again, are having such just remarkable year. You know, he had 2 rushing touchdowns, 74 rush yards, and 20 carries. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good that's coming out of this game. And you have to give it to Josh Hines-Allen, too. He had a sack in 4 straight games. He's up to 7 sacks this season, and he really needs to be disruptive when you have Eric Armstead kind of banged up and injured, and Trayvon Walker just returned. He has been banged up and injured, so it's kind of Josh Hines-Allen show on the defensive line. He's done a great job.
And so just briefly, Jets on Sunday, December 14th. What are you expecting?
It's going to be a blowout. Listen, I grew up in New York. I grew up a Giants fan, though. I have a lot of friends that are Jets fans, and those poor people. I mean, it is tough being a Jets fan. It really is. But, you know, it's going to be obviously a fight. You know, it's an NFL game anyways, but I think the Jaguars will be just fine. Then 2 weeks, like I said, they have to worry about that Broncos game. If they can beat the Broncos, we're good to go. They may dethrone them for the number 2 seed in the AFC.
All right. Well, nice to have some good news. Alessandra Pomprion, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, guys.
All right. And thanks for listening. If you missed anything, you can find all of our past and current shows at firstcoastconnect.org. Join us tomorrow when we preview 2 classic Northeast Florida holiday celebrations, from Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker to Dickens on Center. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. Tidbits, family owned and operated since 1985. 4 locations: Bay Meadows, Hendricks, Mandarin, and now Fleming Island. Menu items include fresh sandwiches, salads, and soups. Open Monday through Saturday. Online ordering and menu at clarastidbits.com.